All right, welcome everyone. I am really excited to have you all here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today on how to build executive presence for women. My name is Sarah McAllister. I am the Senior Associate Director here for Career and Alumni Professional Development in the Office of Alumni Relations. Today we have two just wonderful speakers who actually I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I always feel like it's such a interesting thing to have both people say what they want to say about themselves, and I never feel like I fully do it justice. So we have Nene and Gay here with us. We are going to talk about all kinds of things around executive presence for women, what it means to navigate working in a world of male-dominated industry, as well as what that looks like for our two speakers today and what that can look like for you as well. So before I jump into and hand it off to them to introduce themselves and kick us off on today's conversation, I want this to be both a conversation, just that. So please use the chat. Feel free to include the questions throughout the presentation and throughout the conversation, and I will weave it in as appropriate. And then we'll also have plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions for both our speakers today. This is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which I will post a link throughout the conversation today. So that will be uploaded later today. You can also access any of our previous recordings on that channel as well. So with that, thank you both, Nene and Gay, for being here. Thank you so much for your time. And Nene, I would love for you just to kick us off, introduce yourself, walk us through a little bit about what you do right now, and then we'll hear from Gay.
Sure. So thanks again, Sarah, for having us today. My name is Nene Gianchala. I'm also an alum. I graduated from Tulane in 2007. I actually was a transfer student. I was one of the poor students who showed up and then was told to evacuate the next day from Katrina. And when I came back to campus, I was actually the RA of the trailers post-Katrina on campus. So it's always a fun story as well. And every now and then I run into students who actually live in the trailers with me. So it's fun bonding experience for all of us that were there. And I'm still very active with Tulane. I'm actually the current president of the Tulane Association of Business Alumni this year. So, stay close to my Tulane roots as much as possible. So for my business career, I did lots of internships when I was in school. And then upon graduating Tulane back in 2007, I started as an intern here at Chaffin Associates, and I've never left. So I've been here 15 years this year. And it's, sort of a wonderful career to find, because when I was in undergrad, I loved finance and accounting, and I tried doing an accounting internship with a very large publicly traded company, and I was completely bored to tears. And I was like, obviously, accounting is not going to work for me. Let me follow my finance hat. And I fell into business valuations for a living. And so I love business valuations. It's a nice little blend of finance and accounting. And obviously I love it because, again, I'm still here after 15 years. So that's sort of my background. I'll hand it off to Gay to give a little bit of her history as well.
Well, good morning, or I guess, or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to be here with you as well. I graduated from Tulane Business School in 1977, so just a few years before Nene, and maybe a different world at that time. I'm managing director of Chaffin Associates, and I run the merger and acquisition group with about five professionals doing M&A work, mostly across the Gulf South. And I'm president of our broker dealer, which we need to keep in existence because of SEC and FINRA rules around certain structures of transactions in the sale of companies. I actually started coming out of business school with a bank in New York, a banker's trust company, which is now part of the Deutsche Bank tree, family tree, working in those days, banks actually had extensive training programs. So after being in an additional training program after my MBA for 11 months, that was the short version that they did for MBAs. I went into the Europe group and as staff, trying to justify additional capital allocation to the Europe group versus other parts of the bank. And then I came back to New Orleans to work for First Commerce Corporation, which is now part of the J.P. Morgan Chase family tree, and worked as a loan officer there. And then when banking laws changed in Louisiana, I was invited to be part of the team that was working on purchasing banks in other parishes. Somehow my work in the Europe group, they thought that my work in the Europe group somehow qualified me to do that work. I'm not sure they had much in common, but I didn't say no because I thought the work sounded interesting. And then when that died down, after we bought the first 4 banks, I ended up coming to work for Chaff and Associates, and I've been at Chaff for, I don't know, 35 years or something like that. And first working with banks, and now more generally working with corporations, family-owned and founder-led corporations primarily, although some smaller public companies.
Thank you. Thank you both for just introducing yourselves and kicking us off. With the topic today of executive presence, and the 3 of us talked a little bit before we started today. I'm curious from both of you, what does that look like for you, or do you call it something different, right? So Nene, if you want to kick us off, what does executive presence look like for you?
Sure. And it's funny, I always giggle to myself when I think about executive presence, is it always makes me think of Hamilton and the song, I want to be in the room where it happens. So that always pops in my head when I think about that. It's like, how do you get yourself in the room where like the management decisions are being made? And so it's all about having those leadership skills that inspire people on both sides of your firm. So not only inspire the people that you oversee, that you're supervising, to follow you, but also to inspire, the supervisors above you, so that way they're thinking of you when those management positions come up. Because most likely you're not going to be in the room where it happens when they're looking to promote someone. So you just want to constantly build up those leadership skills, so that way you're an inspiration to everyone in your firm and also outside your firm. So that way, whether or not you have community involvement, when people are looking for people to serve on nonprofit boards, they think of you as well. So it's not something that you're necessarily born with. I know I definitely didn't. I was totally an introvert when I was younger. So it's something you kind of have to build up over time to develop the executive presence and to develop those leadership skills.
Great, thank you.
I listen to Nene and I think, God, I wonder how I got here. I never was quite as intentional about anything as Nene is, or give as much consideration to any point in my career, I think. To me, when I look back at the people that I admire that seem to be, getting attention in bigger corporate settings, a lot of it was around their ability to communicate and stand up, be able to make a presentation, be able to participate in a meeting and with confidence, even if they didn't necessarily feel confident, because there's always moments where we feel like we're faking it, and I guess there's a certain calmness and passion for the work that seemed to be communicated by a lot of these people. So to me, it sort of started there. I'm not an introvert. I love talking to people, and I found that if I just concentrated on what the client needs, because except for the time where I was working at Bankers Trust, I've pretty much been client facing. That most of my life, my efforts have been around what the client needed. if I was concentrating on that and able to communicate and stand up in front of people, that seemed to get me where I needed to go. I'm not sure that's exactly what everyone means by executive presence, but that's what it was for me.
No, I think that's so important. Thank you. In terms of, it does look different for each of us, and that's really why we're here today, is to get a sense from both of you. Let's talk a little bit more about that confidence piece, Gay, that you brought up. Whether I would say intentional or not, how do you develop and maintain confidence in yourself to pursue, whether they're leadership positions, professional growth, or both? How does that professional confidence look for both of you?
Well, my parents never told me I couldn't do anything. I mean, it was just a normal topic of conversation for women to be thinking about financial matters. Although I don't think my parents actually thought about this particular career path, but I never received a message that I shouldn't be confident, and so I'm very grateful to them, because that in the end, could step back and just take a deep breath. Now then you get into positions where you're not exactly sure what you're doing. Sometimes I'm concentrating on a statement that one of my bosses said to me a while ago, which is, clients tend not to have too much depth perception. They know you're out in front of them. They just don't really have a sense for how far out in front of them you are. And that saved me a couple of times. Having a sense for what the next step should be, but not always where something was going, and being able to listen to what was happening around me and understand the playing field. And that gave me confidence, to be able to listen and think I had an idea about where something was supposed to be going.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And what I would add to that is just sort of going back on what Gay said, is find those role models for you. So, it starts with your parents when you're younger, like my mom, was also just supportive. She never said there was something I couldn't do. But then also for all the companies I've worked for, when I was interning over the years, from even jobs when I was a teenager, they were all women-owned businesses except for one. So having all those role models look up to and seeing these women do it before you, is very inspirational and gives you that confidence as well. And so I would just look for finding those, female role models that you can look up to, that you can look to for guidance. And that's not necessarily in your firm. If you don't have anyone like that in your firm, reach out to all these amazing women organizations that we have here in town or in your city. So for example, here in New Orleans, the Junior League of New Orleans, I've been a long time with them, and I've been all sorts of wonderful women who, I've connected with over the years professionally as well. In a volunteer environment, plus several other, women-led organizations to sort of help you find other women in the same boat that you can reach out to for guidance as well. And so as you talk to more people in these leadership roles, it kind of helps you develop your confidence as well.
Very nice. I know that you've both already talked a bit about, your professional journey, but I do kind of want to go back to that for a minute. When you think of, we're talking about confidence, so kind of on that same, what are some other skills that you have needed to develop and build throughout your professional journey to both kind of add to your executive presence or create it in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you one that was extremely difficult for me. The ability to delegate. This was really, really a very difficult thing to me, because basically I knew what I wanted to do. I could get it done. I didn't need to explain it to people. And then eventually I had so much work that I literally couldn't do it. And I sort of had to rely on somebody else. And then I had to let go. And well, first of all, this is a wonderful thing. When you get to a point where you have someone you can delegate stuff to that's good, oh my gosh, it's a life-altering moment. And then you're able to leverage your own work and your own knowledge there, and to be able to produce more in whatever environment you're working. In my case, to be able to produce more revenue for whichever organization it was that I was working for. But I tell you what, I was used to packing the dishwasher the way I wanted it packed, and that to be able to get to a point where it was okay that somebody else packed the dishwasher differently, but we still got the dishes clean, was not an easy step.
And Jay kind of touched on my answer earlier. The one that I think is really important is not being afraid to speak up and ask questions. And so one thing that was kind of hard for me to learn is, you just not like being able to question what your superior might say to you. So if your boss says, oh, I think you should do it this way, it kind of takes you a while to build up the confidence, be like, I don't think that's right. How about we try it this way? Or, I kind of think we should do it a different way, not being afraid to question superiors. And so that kind of helps give you, your comments, your eyes. When you're starting to question the with ideas, you kind of see more of the team player versus just, a little soldier that's going out and, replicating what they ask you to do. Not that I'm saying you should, always contradict them, but I think that's how you also learn, is asking questions. So one thing, with our intern program, as I've always stressed, and even the founder of our firm always stressed, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Do not be afraid to ask questions. That's the easiest way to learn. And so being able to find a work environment where that is encouraged, I think is really beneficial to you as well, because you'll learn more and you'll also develop your confidence quicker, because you'll have an inquisitive mind and not be afraid to ask those questions and think outside the box. If you're in an environment where they're constantly wanting you to stay in the box, that stifles your ability to grow.
I appreciate you bringing up the stifling piece, because I want to just ask a follow-up question to both of you around confidence and around those skills. The question is around, how do you bounce back, right? So how do you, if I assume both of you have had a similar experience of maybe your confidence was, you took a hit to your confidence. Maybe you had a less than pleasant interaction with the supervisor where you just started to question yourself, right? That happens to all of us. How have you navigated through that to continue to build both your confidence and your skills? And what advice would you give to another woman who maybe hasn't had the best of bosses or boss, but wants to heal and move forward?
So the one that I think of not is from a boss role, but one problem I had when I first started out was getting clients to listen to me or look to me at first, because here's this young girl out of college, and it was like, I can remember going on early client meetings and they would look to my male superior to talk business, and then to me to be like, so how many kids do you have? And then like they immediately turn to my boss to ask him questions, related to the business. And I wasn't seen as equivalent. So the way I sort of counter that is knowledge is power, right? So I would do lots and lots of research. And so you kind of want to be the most well-informed person in the room. So every time we go to a client meeting, I would make sure I had researched everything about the client. And all of a sudden it was this young female who was asking the tough questions at the table and not her superior. So I would be the one who sort of be asking the harder ball questions. I had done all my research on the firm. So I came off knowledgeable and more impressive in the room. And it finally got clients to listen to me instead of just seeing me as someone else, like standing off to the side.
I want to second what Nene said. There is no substitute for knowing what you're doing. I mean, there's no substitute for just being knowledgeable about your own work, but also about what's going on with the client and in the room, and that gets you, if you can combine that with speaking up, it's going to get noticed.
And so if you're not working with a client, I was just trying to think like in a different environment, like know what's going on with your company, know what's going on with the firm. Always try to say well-informed. You know, even if it's not, let's say your particular job task, you know what's going on with your company as a whole. That way you're knowledgeable when things come up.
That's great. I think sometimes I think in little snippets, right? And so like be the most knowledgeable person in the room. I think that's great. So we're going to talk a little bit about, something that I think happens to a lot of women in terms of being put into a role of being the invisible leader or expert. How do you avoid becoming an invisible leader or expert without, right? Kind of how do you avoid doing all of the work without the recognition and pay? And then what other setbacks have you experienced and how can they be avoided? I know that we've already kind of touched on that, but let's first focus on the not becoming the invisible leader or expert.
Well, you can create a presence for yourself by writing and appearances. And I've been in at times. I've had a boss or someone in a company who was my mentor, and I've been at times without that. Both times I tend to be out in the public, sometimes in volunteer organizations, particularly professional volunteer organizations. But after a while, if you're out there, you're speaking, you're the one showing up at meetings, they're going to be looking to you. And then when outsiders are looking to you or showing you respect in a meeting because you've developed a relationship with them, then that has a tendency to reverberate inside an organization, and that I think is there are a lot of ways these days that you can get your own voice out there, and that'll help you even if you're going to change jobs.
And then the thing I always recommend is, your resume building doesn't stop when you graduate college. So keep your resume building going, whether that's, in your own firm, but also in extracurriculars. A lot of professionals are very busy in community organizations, professional affiliations, and also keep your LinkedIn profile up to date, because that's where like a lot of recruiting happens these days. Is, there's lots of recruiters who are on LinkedIn, they'll reach out to you. And if your profile stale or you're not even on LinkedIn, you're missing out on opportunities as well. And the other thing I always stress is know your worth. There's lots of organizations out there that have free salary data. You can easily look up what you should be compensated to know whether or not you're being undercompensated. And there's constantly, postings on LinkedIn or recruiters on LinkedIn. And it doesn't hurt to have conversations with recruiters. Or other affiliates who are in the same industry as you. They're just friendly conversations and it helps give you an idea of your worth. And so that sort of will help prevent you from being unrecognized. So if you're talking to your peer and you're saying like, hey, I'm doing these 5 tasks, and he's saying, well, I only do 3 of those tasks, and you find out he's being paid more than you, then it kind of gives you an idea, okay, it's time to have that conversation with your company. So definitely don't undervalue yourself. Know what your value is. Keep an ear in the market to know what's going on. So again, that way you have that knowledge that we talked about earlier, which is really important. So you don't go without that recognition that you might deserve. And if you're going without the recognition and pay, then it's time to have more serious conversations with those recruiters and with your peers for opportunities that are out there.
I would add to that, when you step back and you look at that information, you need to look at yourself. Because you may be doing 5 tasks and the other person is doing 3 tasks, but the 3 tasks that they're doing are more valuable to the employer. And so, I mean, I think that, you have to look at it both ways. What is really valued, what is really earning money or saving money. I think one of the people who gets to be the highest paid in a restaurant is the buyer. not, you know, the chef's well paid too, but the buyer is the one who's making sure that there's a bottom line. You know, where is the value really created in a company? And that might or might not guide you in your interests, what you want to do for your career. But when you start looking at data about you know, how people are paid, you have to look yourself in the mirror too.
Those are great points. I want to, my next question is might be a little granular, but I think it's going to be really helpful for our participants. When we're talking about, we're talking about kind of promotions, growth, raises, things like that. How do you navigate your relationship with your direct boss or the people, the key stakeholders that are responsible for approving those raises, approving those promotions? How do you start those conversations, or how do you continue those conversations? So again, kind of coming back to that, not wanting to be an invisible person, to make sure that they know that you want professional growth, but that it works for you. I don't know if that question is clear, but talk a little bit about your relationship with those people that are responsible for making sure that you're getting more money and you're getting better titles.
I think I got to let Nene answer that question. You know, when I took over the corporate side of M&A many years ago now, I really haven't had much of a boss since then. And you know, and I'm in a profession where the business model is ultimately eat what you kill. You know, so I get paid more in a year if I do well, and I'm really controlling my own destiny to a good extent. Oh, I haven't had to ask anybody what I was going to be paid in several decades. So
Okay.
Nene, go for it.
So, and one thing I found helpful, and you'll hear this in, if you do leadership development series over the years, I've heard it, more than once. I think it's helpful to make sure you're on the same page as your supervisor. So one thing I always like to do, and I'll mention, I'm a checklist person, right? Like, what do you want? Where do you see me in 5 years? What do you need me to accomplish in these 5 years? What do you think I need to improve? Like, don't just go in and say like, oh, I want to raise. You want to say like, this is what I've done, over the last several years. These are my pros. Do your research beforehand, what you think your market rate might be. And then, have all your pros that you've done, like, I accomplished this, this, and this over the last couple of years. This is why I think I deserve it. But then also be prepared in case, there is some feedback as well. Like, well, you need to improve on this, be open to that, critical feedback as well. But, one thing I always think is helpful, just make sure you're on the same page with your career path. Is that you don't want to all of a sudden find out after you have 10 years invested that, oh, I thought I was headed down this path and it turns out it's a different one. Because then it's kind of hard to pivot, and look elsewhere for, the kind of roles that you're looking for. So just try to be sort of open with that conversation. Hopefully you have a supervisor who's, opening those type of conversations about saying like, this is my 5-year career path and this is what we want to see you accomplish.
That's great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
It actually tells you something if they're not open to that. Mm-hmm. That can tell you just as much as a more open and transparent conversation. And it makes, then you have a decision, a more stark decision about whether you want to make a change happen. But either way, that's a great conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm hearing, but from both of you that really keeping it intentional, keeping that as a continuous conversation, not just a one-off, right? So let's talk a little bit about how does executive presence look different in a male-dominated industry, right? How does it look different among genders?
So I did a panel sort of on this topic a couple months ago for the Women's Leadership Summit. And there's a good statistic that they threw out there, which was women feel like they have to be 100% certain that they can accomplish a task, whereas men only have to feel around 60%. And it's funny because I heard that and I was like, wait, I was like, oh, you know what, that's kind of true. Like, I won't try to tackle something unless, you think you'll be successful. And so you kind of have to learn to take those risks. And also be honest with yourself about what you can actually accomplish. So one thing I've also had to learn to do is just be honest with the supervisor, before you take on a task. If you're not 100% confident that you can pull it off, let them know that. So they'll be like, okay, I'm going to take this on, but I'm letting you know, like, I don't have a ton of expertise in this. So I'm going to need your help to help me accomplish this to where it's going to be successful. And, don't be afraid to ask questions and, take their advice. Like, how do you think I should approach that? For example, for my business valuation, if I get a really weird valuation, I'm like, all right, how do you think I should approach this? This is what I was thinking. Am I on the right path, or should I take a different path? And do your research to see, what's sort of the best way to accomplish that task. And so, again, never stress with being asking questions. I'm just really big on, like, never be afraid to ask a question, because you learn through that process as well. And I know if I mentioned that earlier. And so a lot of people tease me because I always have my little checklist of questions. Like, even when I take my daughter to the doctor, my pediatrician knows, all right, bring out the checklist. But I have like a long list of questions I want to ask. So again, ask questions. And even as Sarah said today, ask questions, because you'll learn more today by asking Gay and I questions while you have us available.
Great segue. Gay, any
I got so involved in listening to Nene, I forgot the question.
How does executive presence look different in a male-dominated industry and among genders?
Well, well, first of all, I endorse everything that Nene just said, but I guess my sort of the thing about willing to get out there without being 100% confident. I mean, I think almost all women I know have had to kind of work on that one. And I think that really is true. I'm better at it now than I was, because you're first trying to establish yourself, you want to be the most knowledgeable person in the room, but which is a little bit contrary to what we're saying here about getting out there. Being open to opportunities, but there is a sort of there is sometimes a sort of presence of just kind of men hanging together. That sometimes you just have to kind of, I don't know, do I ignore it? Do I join in on it? I'm not somebody who's going to go play golf. I have friends who learned to play golf so they'd be on the golf course. I have, I pretty much started paying attention to football so that I would at least know what was happening on Monday morning. I mean, there was a certain level of kind of just joining in and a little bit of effort. Not a lot of effort. I used to live next door to Archie Manning. I realized everybody gathered in front of my desk on Monday morning waiting for me to say something, as if I knew anything more than the news. But, I learned pretty quickly that I needed to have something to say on Monday morning. He was limping when he walked up his front steps. I'm not sure what it was they expected. But there is that. And I think just realizing that sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you are just dealing with that and not letting it roll off your back because sometimes it can be just a lot. On the other hand, I recently had a transaction where everybody on the other side was a woman. That was wonderful. And about halfway through this transaction, which was my client wasn't so much them, but the representative, the buyer on the other side, about halfway through the transaction, we looked at each other one day on Zoom and said, sure is nice having a woman on the other end of the conversation. It can work both ways.
I love that. And also that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Of how nice it is sometimes. We have a question around I'll just ask it. What is your recommendation for how to approach difficult conversations with direct reports when you are a young leader?
And so I just want to double check. So when you say direct reports, you mean like a supervisor above you, or someone you're overseeing below you in the hierarchy?
Somebody
Overseeing.
you're overseeing.
Oh, you're overseeing. Okay.
This is where I get, this is one of those things that always makes me nervous. And if I've got to have a difficult conversation with somebody, I mean, this is where I love Nadine's list, because I've been known to do a list or two in my life. And, I rehearse those conversations in my head, because it is difficult to tell somebody something that they maybe don't want to hear, and to try to say it in a way that it can lead to a positive outcome. Now, what do I mean by a positive outcome? There are times when I've had a conversation like that, and the other person changed their behavior and improved and did exactly what was needed and continued as a great employee. And there are times when we kind of work through that they weren't really happy and it wasn't a good fit, and they moved on. Or times where the person had grown in the job, but the job hadn't grown, and we didn't have room to move them up. And which is very difficult, because you've got a great employee, and you have to tell them that you can't do more for them, even though they're really worth more. And you're in a sense helping them out the door, which can be really painful. I've had people come back to me years later and say, now I understand what you were doing. At the time, they were unhappy. We'll just say unhappy, because they thought, we were being sort of disloyal for somebody who'd done a great job for us. But every one of those conversations, I had to really work it out in my head, because it is difficult.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, Gay addressed it, I think, very eloquently, is kind of give them a heads up. No one wants to be like called in, not know why, and then all of a sudden feel like attacked. But if you let them know sort of ahead of time, I'd like to have a conversation with you about XYZ, it gives them time to prepare as well and come prepared to the meeting. So that way they don't feel like they're being cornered or caught off guard. It sort of starts, I think, the conversation in a better area than just sort of surprising them.
I think that's great. And I appreciate how both of you acknowledged. I think sometimes we don't always allow space for acknowledging it's difficult for a reason, right? Like there's not really a catch-all to not make it a difficult conversation. I don't know. I think sometimes we don't always acknowledge that. So thank you. For our final question, I want to just talk generally about, what are some tangible certifications, degrees? I know both of you had talked a little bit about professional organizations in the past. How has professional development, certifications, and degrees affected becoming a leader? And do you have specific resources, organizations that you would recommend?
So I would start by saying certifications are very industry specific. So I could tell you what mine are, but that necessarily wouldn't probably apply to most people on the call. So what I would just sort of give as that advice is look at the career path you want, look at the people in the role that you want to have eventually, and see what certifications they have. So for example, when I started here, I looked at all the other people in my department, and they were all CPAs. And I was like, well, I don't have a CPA. Maybe I should get one of those. And so I went back to school at night and got the hours so I could sit for my CPA exam, and then a bunch of other letters after my name. But, sort of look at where you want to go, look at your supervisors, look at what they have in regards to whatever certifications you might want to pursue. Since again, they're very industry specific. Some other great resources is, not always just, technical programs, but also be sure to continue with leadership programs, professional development, like y'all are all doing today. I kind of have this rule of thumb, as a CPA, I have to do a lot of hours, like, a lot of hours every year for continuing education, for technical things, but also you want to spend time on yourself. So try to pick 1 or 2 good programs that you see over the year and do continuing education on you. For example, I did this great program earlier this year. It was called Positive Intelligence. And so it was like a 6 weeks program that I went through, and it was all about, recognizing the saboteurs that you have, how do you accidentally saboteur yourself? And so that was a really good enlightening program. And there's a book on it too, which I would recommend. And so like you're your number one saboteur, right? You're your own judge and are constantly saying, I can't do that. So it was like great little tips about how you could get past your own, saboteuring yourself. There's lots of great programs out there like that I would definitely recommend. But again, don't always forget to have, spend some time on yourself. And then the last resource I always recommend is, it's kind of more common these days that I've seen. I've talked to a couple other ladies that do as well, is have a personal board of directors. I love this concept. And so just have a couple of women or men, you can have men on your board of directors who are outside your firm that you can talk to about things. So I sort of have a couple of people that I see as mentors who, are not within my firm as well. So you can talk to them, about like, should I pursue this thing or this? And they're kind of like a great personal board of directors for you to help you with that advice. Obviously you still want to have your mentors within your organization, but sometimes you need to get advice from people outside your organization as well. So those are just a couple of tips that I've used over the years.
That's great. Okay, what about you?
I'm not sure I can add a whole lot to what Nene said. When I was coming along a long time ago, just having an MBA was the credential. I have all sorts of securities licenses and other things like that I need professionally. But I wouldn't mind having another CFA around. And we've had various CFAs in our firm over time. Wouldn't mind having one more of those. I'm not going back for that credential. It's too hard. But a lot of the work we do, what we're doing, we don't really need credentials as much. I'm not trying to do a lot of expert testimony. I do some, but I'm not, in certain settings, you really need to have all those credentials to be seen as the expert. When I get requests, a lot of times I'm referring to over to the valuation side of our firm, because I know if there is anyone ever has to appear in court, all of those letters that come after Nene's name are going to look very impressive. And it's going to make it easier for the judge or a jury to understand that this person really is knowledgeable about what should be happening. When I was coming along, there weren't as many women in business, and it was harder to have a sort of real women's network. But over the years that's no longer the case, and I both enjoy that and have relied on it at different times when I needed a voice outside of my own head to talk something over with. So that I really think that's worth pursuing, and we can get too busy in our lives to actually cultivate those networks, or really even to cultivate our network of women friends. It's very easy to get lost in your work and not do that. And so I think Nene's comment there is really one to reflect on.
Thank you both. I would also add to Nene's suggestion about, looking at people who are in positions that you want to be in. LinkedIn is a wonderful resource for that as well, to see, right? Use the search bar, put in the title that you want eventually, and look at their trajectory and what certifications and degrees that they have as well. Well, with that, if we don't have any other questions from our participants, I would love for both of you to just kind of take us out on some final thoughts on our conversation today. What do you really want? Is there anything else that is on your mind in terms of executive presence or our conversation today? And And also with that, if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Sure. I think I would just end with networking is great. You know, like you were mentioning earlier, Sarah, like look on LinkedIn. I see there's another comment. More and more mentees are finding great jobs on LinkedIn. And, you know, it's also a great opportunity now. It's amazing how many women I've talked to over the past year, you know, due to everyone going remote the last couple of years, is like it's opened up more doors and opportunities for people, because now you can live in New Orleans and work for I have one friend who, you know, never wanted to leave the city. So she, you know, her career path was kind of like limited to what she could do and who she could work for. But thanks to the pandemic, now she's working for an amazing firm in California that she never wanted to work for because she loves the city so much and has family here. But now she can work for them because she's remote. So there's lots of more opportunities, I feel like, out there for people. Definitely use networking. There's lots of great women organizations or even other organizations in town. It doesn't have to be a women's organization. Lots of great conferences. Like there's lots of great, you know, there's Women Making Waves, lots of great women leadership conferences that you can attend. And that's a great way to network with other women. I attended the Women's Leadership Conference earlier this year that the Chamber put on. There's lots of amazing women at this conference. And no matter which one you talk to, it's great different career paths. And so I think just sort of networking with all these other women who are around can kind of give you some confidence and inspiration as well for what opportunities might be out there.
That's great.
I guess the other thought I have, which, gosh, I hope I can say this in a way that it will be a helpful comment, is I don't much think about being a woman in business. Mostly that stems from, I don't find thinking about myself very interesting. You know, I like hearing about what my clients are doing and, you know, how their businesses work and what their problems and concerns are. And that's much more interesting to me. I sometimes have to remind myself to talk about myself and chaff, although I find it easier to talk about chaff than myself. You know, when we're in a sale part of acquiring a new client. But I also think somewhere in there, it's, you know, you know, you're really focusing on the other person. You know, then any concerns or sensitivities that you have about being a woman in a circumstance where you're sitting there with, you know, 5 guys in the oil industry, or, you know, I mean, I once did a fairness opinion for a publicly traded strip club. I'm not making that up. And, you know, I'm sitting there before the meeting, listening to these guys talk about their work. It was a totally bizarre experience at one level, you know, but I wasn't sitting there thinking about I'm a woman. I was just sitting there thinking about what we needed to do to get the assignment done you know, for this small public company. And I think if you can do that, sometimes you can get past your own concerns and fears, because you're not focusing on them anymore. You're focusing outward, and that has helped me at times.
This is great. Thank you both. Nene, I saw that you put both your and Gay's LinkedIn in the chat.
I did. Feel free to reach out to us. And thank you again, Sarah, for having us today, and everyone who listened in. Thanks for joining us. And please feel free to connect with Gay or myself on LinkedIn, or, you know, reach out to us via email as well.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you both.
Great.
Thank you for joining. And I hope everyone has a really great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
I thank y'all.